Hey guys, it's Chloe. Welcome back, or welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you guys how I removed my stock Bilstein shocks on my Tacoma TRD off-road and replaced them with the Fox 2.5 Race Series rear shocks with remote reservoirs. Now, if you guys are curious on why I decided to do the suspension upgrade in the first place, why I decided on Fox 2.5s, want more information on Fox shocks for Tacomas, or just want to know my overall plans for my suspension on my Tacoma, you guys can check out a video I recently posted, but this video is specifically going to be on just how to install Fox 2.5 rear shocks on the Tacoma. Really quick before we get into the install, I will be doing a series of videos reviewing these shocks both on and off-road, and I have a lot of other fun videos like rock slider installs coming up on the channel, so if you guys are interested in that sort of stuff for Tacomas, feel free to subscribe to follow along. Now, without further ado, let me show you guys how to install these shocks on my Tacoma. So the first thing we're going to do is jack up the vehicle. Now here I have a Pro Eagle jack. This jack is great. It's specifically made for off-road. As you can see, it has bigger wheels and it actually has a skid plate underneath. This is a 1.5 ton jack and it's perfect for the Tacoma. And I actually have a whole video review on it, which I'll link down below if you guys want to check it out. Now, right before I finish jacking up the Tacoma all the way, I like to loosen the lug nuts, so we're going to do that right now. So I have the vehicle lifted now where the tire clears the ground, and in addition to the Pro Eagle jack, I put a 6-ton jack stand right underneath the frame. And by the way, yes, these are from Harbor Freight, but no, they are not the ones that are recalled specifically. The part number on them indicates that they weren't part of the recall, and then they actually took them into Harbor Freight because I was still afraid, and they told me that these specific ones were not part of the recall. So we have the Pro Eagle jack there still, but this setup should be just fine. Before I get started on the shock install, I really quickly wanted to clean off some of this surface rust that's built up on this drum brake. For that, I'm going to be using some degreaser and a wire wheel. So this is the after. It's not perfect obviously, but definitely better than before. Taking off any surface rust is better than taking off no surface rust. I didn't do any sort of coating beyond just taking off the surface rust, but I might do that in the future. If you guys would be interested on a video on how to clear off surface rust, then coat your drum brakes, let me know in the comments down below, but let's actually get into the install of the shocks. All right, so we're gonna start at the top of the shock, and I'm going to use a ratchet wrench to go over the nut, and then vice grips to hold the actual top of the shock in place. Now the nut is off. Now we're going to remove the lower portion of the shock with a 17mm ratchet wrench. So we got the nut and washers, and then you also want to make sure you save this lower bolt because it's going to be used in the new shock assembly with the Fox shocks. Here's a comparison side by side of the two different shocks. I just wanted to give you guys a look before we put the Fox one on, and I have a pair of calipers here so we can actually measure the size or the width of the stock Bilstein. And that is reading 1.553 inches. And the Fox, on the other hand, is 2.553, so about an inch in difference in shock width. All right, so now we're gonna put the rear Fox shock in. As per the Fox instructions, they say to do the top first. So we're gonna remove the top nut and then top washer and bushing. Now I'm going to use a 19mm wrench to tighten the top nut down. So this bolt isn't fully tightened down now, but it's good enough so that we can work on the rest of the shock. I'm gonna go back and tighten all the bolts when we're done at the end and mark them each with a Sharpie to make sure I didn't miss anything. So the next thing we want to do is secure the bottom of the new Fox shock in place. Now basically this involved fitting in the new shock in between these two shock tabs, and it was pretty difficult, and it's a pretty tight fit just because Fox's tolerances are so tight. So basically what I had to do is actually take a mallet and pound the bottom of the shock lightly to get it to fit in place in between these two tabs. And then now I'm using the old screw that we took off of the Bilstein shock, so same screw from the old assembly, and putting that in the same place as it was before. Also, I forgot to mention, I'm going to be putting a couple drops of blue Loctite on the back of this thread. This is what Fox recommends in their instructions. I didn't show it on camera, but I also did it for the top thread at the top of the shock as well. So I just put a couple drops, and this is the old nut and washer from the previous assembly, and we are going to put that on, and then we're going to tighten it down with a 17mm ratchet wrench and then torque it down to spec with a torque wrench. So now that the shock is completely in place, the last thing to do is to mount the reservoir, and honestly this might be the hardest part because basically Fox provides you with these little mounting plates, and what you have to do is you have to drill holes in your frame to mount this bracket into place to mount the reservoir. Now from what I understand and from the instructions that I read, this is kind of a custom deal. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how I want the reservoir mounted, but they recommend you measure 25 inches from the center of the top of the shock, and that's where you mount this plate to. So I'm not sure if my setup is going to be exact, but let me show you guys how I'm going to end up doing it. To mount the reservoir, what I'm going to do is kind of eyeball where I want it on the frame. And instead of kind of having it out like this, I want it angled up so that there's a little bit of a bend in this shock hose or reservoir hose or whatever this is called, just because I like the look of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the mounting plate from Fox and I'm going to stick it under where I intend to mount the reservoir, then kind of make sure the reservoir fits in the mount the way I like it, and then carefully switch hands and lower the reservoir. I'm going to take a silver Sharpie and mark exactly where I want the holes. What I'm doing really quickly is putting a little bit of truck bed liner inside these new holes I made. Obviously, since I just drilled into my frame, I could have a potential rust issue, so this is just a little extra precautionary step. So now we're on to the last step, where all I have to do is mount the reservoir onto the reservoir mount using these hose clamps. Now, all you're supposed to do is use the hose clamp and tie the reservoir down, but I do want to make this a little bit nicer, so I have some heat shrink here that I'm going to wrap around the hose clamp just so it's cleaner overall. This is also helpful so it doesn't actually scratch the reservoir or chip the reservoir, because this is metal. But yeah, this was a tip I picked up with my electrical engineering background, and I've seen a couple other people do it when mounting the reservoirs, so I just want to do this finishing touch just so it looks extra nice. So right here on the hose clamp, I've marked, I think, where the heat shrink can finish, so I'm going to measure out how long that is. So it's going to start here and wrap around and be about this length. So I'm going to cut it right here, and then I'm going to cut another piece the same exact size, and then I'm just going to put these on the hose clamps. And now we're actually going to use some heat to neaten this up a little bit. Okay guys, so the end product of the heat sink on these hose clamps is going to end up looking like this. And basically, to do this, I'm using a propane torch, and we're going to turn it on and hold one end, and be careful because this is metal, and you just want to go around and you'll slowly see the heat shrink starting to tighten up and contract. usually what I do when I finish one side, I wait for it to cool down, and then once it has, I flip it over and then finish off the other side. And then this is what the final product ends up looking like. I think it looks a lot nicer, plus the black will match the black reservoirs, at least for my Fox one. And again, you won't have to really worry about chipping or scratching the metal. So that's how you do that, pretty easy. All right guys, we have reached the last step, at least the last step for this side, which is just mounting the reservoir using these hose clamps. So basically, what I'm gonna try to do is mount them to hide these screws if possible, just because everything is black and it would be nice if I could hide it. The best way I could think of was going through the loop from above, and I think the screws are hidden that way, but we'll see when we mount the reservoir. So I'm gonna start with the bottom part down here. Now I'm gonna go in with a flathead to tighten this down even more. And actually, just by putting this on, I think I'm gonna move the reservoir a little bit more up, so I'm gonna loosen this just enough to move the reservoir a tiny bit up. I think at this point with me, it's just mostly trial and error. I mean, I didn't even mount these reservoir plates as Fox recommended, but just in a place I wanted. And that's the great thing about doing these installs yourself, is you actually get to see what's going on, and also you get to learn. I've never personally mounted a reservoir before, so that was something I got to learn from this. I have swapped out rear shocks before, but overall I think this project was really fun. I hope that here on my YouTube channel you can kind of deduce from a lot of my videos, especially the salvage Tacoma rebuild, that I am a big DIYer. I like to try to do things myself if possible. Obviously that's not always the case all the time, but owning a Tacoma and modding a Tacoma is just non-stop learning, as many of you guys I'm sure know as well. And that should be good to go. As you can see, the reservoir's mounted. We got the heat shrink on. I think it looks awesome. All we have to do is put the wheel and tire back on and do the other shock. The very last thing we're gonna do before we put the wheel and tire back on is make sure that the 2 bolts that we used for the top and the bottom of the shock are torqued down to factory spec, or as the Fox instructions specified. So for the top bolt, it says to make sure the overall stem is 5/8 of an inch. So we're just gonna measure that, and to my eye that looks just about right. I don't have a paint pen with me, but I do have a black Sharpie, and these bolts are silver, so I am gonna mark them. Basically, this is just a peace of mind check to make sure I remember that I tightened down all the bolts, even though there were only 2, and just in case this bolt, for whatever reason, comes loose, you can see it. Now, I already used a torque wrench for the bottom bolt to make sure it was torqued down to spec, so I'm just going to quickly mark it, and then we'll put the wheel and tire on. All right, guys, the last step I have on this side is to mount the wheel and tire back on the truck. Now, really quick, I did put some anti-seize on these threads over here, so just wanted to mention that, but now I'm going to mount the wheel and tire. Alright guys, so this is the finished setup and what it looks like on the driver's side over here, and then here's what the passenger side looks like. Also, if you notice, the reservoir on the passenger side faces the back of the truck this way, but the reservoir on the driver's side faces the driver, so that's just something to note. But I'm very happy with the results, at least in terms of appearance. It looks really good. Also, I did measure the height before and after. Obviously, it shouldn't have changed, and it didn't right before. Both sides were about 7 or maybe just under 7 inches, and as you can see, the ride height has stayed the same here. No surprises there. The passenger side only took me about 30 minutes to do, but I did do the driver's side first, so I knew exactly what I was gonna do for this side, and also I didn't have the camera set up and I wasn't explaining every single step, just because I didn't want to bore you guys with both sides. But overall, I rate this install as fairly easy. If you guys are thinking about taking off your stock shocks on your Tacoma and swapping them out with something new, you have the right tools, enough time, and the interest, of course, I highly recommend you do it. I personally don't come from a very mechanically trained background, but I did study engineering in undergrad, and I work as an engineer full-time, so I do have an interest in tinkering, and I was able to do this. So hopefully this video helps if you guys are deciding whether to do this on your truck or not. I'm really excited to try these shocks out, so I'm gonna go for a really quick test drive, and then I'll let you guys know what I think. So I just came back from a short little test drive with the new Fox rear shocks installed, and just from backing out of the driveway I could already feel that they were a little bit stiffer than the stock Bilstein ones were. Now granted, the stock Bilsteins had 17,000-ish miles on them, so it's not an apples to apples comparison in my opinion, because these Fox shocks only have like 25 miles on them. But overall, just from this short test drive, just on the pavement, the ride quality is definitely enhanced. Like I said, it is a little bit of a stiffer ride, but I feel like the handling on the truck is a little bit better with these rear shocks installed. Now we don't even have the front coilovers in, so I'm sure the ride quality is going to change even more dramatically when we install those. Like this video, I will do a complete install videos of those front coilovers, just in case any of you guys were curious, but I do think it's going to be a little bit more difficult than these rear shocks just because there's a little bit more going on in the front, but I'm really excited to get those and actually level out the truck and see how the ride feels then. I will be making separate videos reviewing the ride quality of these shocks both on and off-road, so stay tuned for that. I also have an off-road trip planned that I'm going to bring you guys along with, and obviously it's going to be with these new shocks, so I can't wait for that. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching today's video. If you guys want to keep up more with me and get more content in real time, you can follow my Instagram at ChloeKuoTaco. Feel free to subscribe if you want, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.